We tend to talk about patriarchy like it's always been here, right? Like it's just a fact of life, something natural. But what if it isn't? What if it's actually an invention? Today, we're going to dig into the evidence that suggests exactly that it's a social system with a very specific starting point.
So, this is the big question we're tackling here. Is male dominance our biological destiny, something hardwired into our DNA? Or is it a 12,000-year-old invention, something we built piece by piece? I mean, think about it. The answer to that question changes absolutely everything about how we see ourselves, our history, and even what's possible for the future.
Okay, so to even start to answer that, we've got to go back in time. And I mean way back. We need to look at what human life was like for, most of the time we've been on this planet. For almost all of human history, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, we were foragers, hunter-gatherers. We lived in these small, flexible groups that were always on the move. And the most important thing archaeologists have found is that these societies were, by and large, pretty equal. There's just not really any solid evidence for the kind of rigid, male-dominated hierarchy that comes later on. And this is where you can really see the change in black and white. On one hand, you have forager societies. They're mobile, they're relatively equal, and they're built around these strong, cooperative networks of female kin. Then, agriculture happens, and society becomes sedentary, hierarchical, and based on these isolated little nuclear families. This wasn't just a new diet, you guys. This was a complete and total rewiring of how humans live together. So, what on earth happened? What was the catalyst for such a massive change? Well, it all started with a revolution that seemed like a great idea at the time, but it ended up casting this incredibly long shadow over human history. Let's talk about the agricultural revolution. Farming was, no doubt, a total game changer. Suddenly, you could produce more food than you needed right away, a surplus. But man, there was a dark side. People started living closer together, so disease spread like wildfire. Our diets got way less diverse, leading to health problems. And here's the kicker. For the very first time, things like land and grain became property, something you could own, something you had to defend, and something you could pass on to your kids. And this is where you see the dominoes start to fall. It's a perfect chain reaction. Step 1, agriculture creates property. Step 2, once you have property, you need to know who you're going to give it to, right? You need heirs. Step 3, to be certain about your heirs, you have to control reproduction. And at the exact same time, you have new kinds of work, like plowing fields or fighting wars over that land, that tend to put men in positions of power. The point is, patriarchy didn't just appear overnight. It was a cascade, one thing leading logically to the next. And the coolest part is, we can literally see this change happening in the archaeological record. It's like watching a movie in slow motion over thousands of years. Early on, you look at burials and settlements, and things are pretty much the same for everybody. But then, as time goes on, things start to change. Suddenly you see male graves filled with weapons and treasure. You see huge houses for elite men popping up. And the art, it goes from celebrating female fertility to celebrating male kings, warriors, and gods. The evidence is right there, in the dirt, showing this hierarchy being built piece by piece. But maybe the most heartbreaking evidence comes from the bones themselves. The skeletons from this period tell a really stark story. As farming became the norm, women's health just plummeted. You can see evidence of malnutrition, the incredible strain of having more babies, and markers of back-breaking labor right there on their skeletons. This wasn't just some abstract social shift. It had a real, brutal, physical cost for women. But here's the thing. A system of control like this doesn't just happen because of economics. For it to really take hold, you had to break something else. The original social safety net. And the absolute key to that was shattering the powerful bonds between women. And this next idea is a really challenging one. We all tend to idealize the nuclear family, right? We see it as this timeless, natural thing. But the historical argument here is that it was actually a tool, created for a very specific purpose, in this new world of property and control. So think about how it worked. In forager groups, a woman lived with her mom, her sisters, her aunts. She had this built-in support network right there. But in the new agricultural system, women were married off and had to move to their husband's village to live with his family. This cut them off from everyone they knew. And an isolated person is much more dependent, much easier to control. It's a classic strategy, divide and conquer, but applied at the most personal family level.
Okay, so you've built this radical new social structure, but how do you make it stick? You can't just rely on force. You need a good story. You need a powerful idea, an ideology that makes this whole setup feel like it's not just new, but natural, inevitable even.
First up, religion. The new religions that emerged in these farming societies put men front and center. Suddenly, you have these all-powerful male creator gods. You get priests who are all men. And you get holy books that literally say male dominance is God's will. It was a brilliant move, really. It took a human invention and rebranded it as a divine command. After religion came philosophy. For hundreds and hundreds of years, some of the smartest guys on the planet, from ancient Greece all the way to the Enlightenment, spent a lot of time writing about how women were naturally inferior. Less logical, less moral, you name it. They were building these complex intellectual justifications for a social system that was, let's remember, actually brand new. And then, in more modern times, when those old arguments started to feel a bit shaky, the justification got a scientific-sounding update. People started coming up with theories like man the hunter, or pointing to bogus studies about brain sizes. It was all an attempt to give this old social system a fresh coat of biological paint, to make it seem like it was just an inevitable result of evolution. Okay, so at this point, you might be thinking, this is all fascinating ancient history, but so what? What does any of this have to do with my life today? Well, the thing is, the blueprints of this 12,000-year-old system, they are everywhere. I mean, just take a look at something as basic as unpaid work around the house. The data on this chart just confirms what most of us already know from our own lives. Women still do way, way more of the unpaid cleaning, cooking, and childcare, even when they're also working a full-time job. That's not a coincidence. That is a direct echo of those ancient roles we were just talking about. And these echoes are all over the place. Think about it. Why are jobs like nursing and teaching, professions dominated by women, so undervalued and underpaid? Why are there still so few women at the very top of business and politics? And that isolated nuclear family structure, it's still the gold standard we're all measured against. A model designed for a world of property control, not for the well-being of modern families. And this is the real takeaway. When we talk about something like the epidemic of parental burnout today, it's not because parents are failing. It's because the system is failing them. It's the completely predictable outcome of expecting one or two isolated adults to do a job that for nearly all of human history was shared by an entire community of relatives and friends. So that brings us back to our big definition. What is patriarchy? It's not our biological destiny. It's not just how things are. It is a social system. A system that humans created under very specific historical circumstances to deal with brand new problems like who gets the farm and who inherits the cows.
And that leaves us with one last really powerful thought. If patriarchy is an invention, if it's something we built to solve the problems of a world that, frankly, doesn't exist anymore, well, then that means we can invent something else. We can be the architects of what comes next. So the real question isn't just about where we came from. It's about what we want to build in its place.